The night was dark, and the storm was raging. Thunder shook the windows of John's small farmhouse, and rain hit the roof like a drumbeat. John sat by the fire, sipping a cup of coffee. He had lived alone on his farm for years. Tonight, he planned to go to bed early, but the storm had other ideas. Suddenly, a loud crash shook the ground. The sound was so loud that John dropped his cup, and it shattered on the wooden floor. He froze for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. It wasn't thunder. This was something else. Something bigger. John grabbed his flashlight and raincoat. The storm outside was wild, but curiosity pushed him forward. As he stepped outside, the wind almost knocked him over. He pulled his coat tighter and made his way toward the noise. In the distance, he saw something glowing near the edge of his field. The glow wasn't normal. It was bright and blue, flickering like fire, but colder somehow. John's boots sank into the muddy ground as he got closer. His breath came out in short bursts, partly from the cold and partly from fear. When he reached the edge of the field, he saw it, a massive, strange object buried in the dirt. It looked like a machine, but not one he had ever seen before. It was shiny and smooth, with strange markings on its surface. Sparks flew from the broken edges, and smoke rose into the air. "What in the world is this?" John muttered to himself. He moved closer, holding his flashlight high. The object was some kind of ship, no doubt about it, but it wasn't anything from Earth. As he stood there, John nodded, unsure of what to say. He reached for the blanket draped over the back of the sofa and wrapped it around the figure. It flinched at first, then relaxed as the warmth spread. "What's your name?" John asked, his voice softer now. The being hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "Alara," it finally said. "My name is Alara." "Alara," John repeated, testing the unfamiliar sound. "I'm John. You're not from around here, are you?" Alara gave a faint smile. "No, not from here. Not from this planet." John leaned back, his heart racing again. He had figured as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a shiver down his spine. "Why are you here? What happened to your ship?" Alara's smile faded. Her eyes flicked toward the window, where the storm raged on, lightning illuminating the room in flashes. "I was running," she said simply. "My ship. It wasn't meant to land here. It was damaged. I had no choice." "Running from what?" John pressed. Her gaze shifted back to him, and for the first time, he saw fear in her glowing eyes. "Hunters," she said. "They're coming for me." John felt his stomach drop. "Hunters? What kind of hunters?" "They are mercenaries," Alara explained, her voice growing weaker. "They were hired to capture me, to stop me." "Stop you from what?" John asked, leaning closer. Alara hesitated again, as if deciding how much to reveal. "I carry something important. Information. A way to save my people. If they catch me, it will all be lost." John stared at her, struggling to process what she was saying. Aliens? Mercenaries? A mission to save her people? This was too much for a simple farmer like him to handle. And yet, here he was, in the middle of it all. Before he could respond, a sudden flash of light lit up the room. But it wasn't lightning. It was sharper, more focused. John turned toward the window and saw it, strange, glowing lights hovering in the distance, moving closer. "They're here," Alara whispered, panic creeping into her voice. John's blood ran cold. "What do we do?" Alara tried to sit up but winced in pain, clutching her side. "You must hide me. If they find me, they'll kill you too." John didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed the blanket and wrapped it tightly around Alara, then lifted her into his arms again. "Hold on," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gripping him. He carried her to the old cellar beneath the farmhouse. It was cramped and dusty, filled with jars of preserves and old tools, but it was hidden. He laid Alara down on an old cot and grabbed his shotgun from the wall. "You can't fight them," Alara said, her voice urgent. "Their weapons are beyond anything you've seen." John shook his head. "I'm not letting them take you without a fight." Alara stared at him, her glowing eyes softening. "You don't even know me. Why are you helping me?" John paused, the shotgun heavy in his hands. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "Now stay quiet. I'll handle this." He climbed back up the cellar stairs, closing the door behind him. The storm outside was still roaring, but the strange lights were closer now, cutting through the rain like knives. John stepped out onto the porch, his shotgun loaded and ready. In the distance, he saw them. 3 figures, tall and menacing, their silhouettes barely visible in the rain. They moved with purpose, scanning the ground with strange devices that hummed with energy. John's heart pounded as he raised the shotgun. He didn't know what he was up against, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let them take her. The first figure stepped closer, its glowing eyes locking onto him. It raised a strange weapon, and John tightened his grip on the shotgun. "Hey," he shouted, his voice cutting through the storm. "You're on my land. Get off, or I'll make you." The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised its weapon higher. John didn't wait. He fired, the shotgun's blast echoing across the field. The figure staggered but didn't fall. John's eyes widened as the thing straightened up, its glowing weapon charging with light. This wasn't going to be easy. The pursuit begins. John's shotgun blast echoed into the storm, but the figure in front of him barely flinched. Sparks flew from its chest, but whatever armor it was wearing had absorbed most of the impact. The alien hunter tilted its head, as if studying him, before taking another deliberate step forward. "What the hell are you made of?" John muttered, stepping back onto his porch, rain pouring down his face. He fumbled to reload, hands trembling, but the hunter was already raising its glowing weapon. A bright blue light hummed at the barrel's tip, growing brighter by the second. Before John could react, the hunter fired. A beam of light sizzled past him, hitting the porch railing and blasting it to splinters. The heat from the shot made John's face burn, and he dove inside the house, slamming the door shut. His heart pounded as he pressed his back against the door, shotgun clutched tightly in his hands. Through the rain, he could hear them, more footsteps approaching, slow and heavy. There were 3 of them, and they were closing in on the farmhouse. In the cellar below, Alara could feel the vibrations of their footsteps through the floor. Her glowing blue eyes flicked toward the trapdoor as fear gripped her. She knew the hunters would stop at nothing to find her. If they captured her, it would mean the end of everything she had risked her life for. But something else worried her now. John. She hadn't expected him to risk himself for her. Humans were supposed to be selfish, primitive creatures, yet here he was, fighting against impossible odds to protect her. Upstairs, John peeked through the window, his hands shaking. He saw the hunters fanning out, their strange devices scanning the area. They moved with precision, like soldiers. The one he'd shot earlier was still standing, a faint glow repairing the damage on its chest. "Great," John muttered under his breath. "They're bulletproof and they heal." Fantastic. He had no idea how to fight something like this. His shotgun was practically useless, and there was no way he could outrun them. For a brief moment, he considered leaving Alara in the cellar and making a run for it. But then he remembered the fear in her voice, the desperation in her eyes. He couldn't abandon her. Not now. As he debated his next move, one of the hunters stepped onto the porch. The wooden boards creaked under its weight. John held his breath. The shotgun aimed at the door. The hunter raised its scanning device, the glow from its screen casting an eerie light over the room. John needed a plan, and fast. He spotted an old lantern sitting on the counter, and an idea struck him. It was risky, but he didn't have any other options. He grabbed the lantern, unscrewed the cap, and poured the kerosene onto the floor near the door. He lit a match and dropped it, the flame roaring to life instantly. The fire spread quickly, creating a barrier between him and the door. The hunter outside hesitated, its glowing eyes analyzing the flames. John used the distraction to grab a chair and shove it against the doorknob, barricading the entrance. "That should buy me a few seconds," he muttered, turning and sprinting toward the cellar door. He yanked it open and climbed down the ladder, closing it behind him. Alara sat up on the cot, her silver skin glowing faintly in the dark. "They're here, aren't they?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yeah," John said, grabbing a toolbox from the corner. "And they're not playing around." He rummaged through the box, pulling out an old wrench and a roll of duct tape. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He turned to Alara, his face serious. "You said you've got advanced tech, right? Can we use any of it to fight back?" Alara shook her head. "My equipment was destroyed in the crash. I only have this." She held up a small device, no bigger than a deck of cards. Its surface was covered in glowing symbols. "What is it?" John asked. "It's a disruptor," Alara explained. "It can disable their weapons temporarily, but only at close range, and it only works once before it burns out." John frowned, examining the device. "Close range, huh? That's not ideal." "It's all we have," Alara said. "If they get to us, you have to use it. Aim it directly at their weapons." John nodded, slipping the disruptor into his pocket. "Stay here. If things go south, I'll hold them off as long as I can." "No," Alara said firmly, grabbing his arm. "You can't fight them. They're stronger than you. Faster. You'll die." John looked into her glowing blue eyes, his expression unyielding. "I've survived worse," he said, though he wasn't sure if it was true. "Besides, if I don't do something, they'll find you. And I can't let that happen." Alara's grip tightened. "John, if they capture me, you have to run. Promise me." John didn't answer. Instead, he climbed back up the ladder, his shotgun in one hand and the disruptor in the other. He could hear the hunters moving around the house now, their heavy footsteps shaking the walls. The fire at the door had died down, and the barricade wouldn't hold much longer. As he stood there, waiting for the inevitable, John took a deep breath. He wasn't a soldier or a hero. He was just a farmer. But tonight, he was all that stood between Alara and certain death. The door burst open, and the first hunter stepped inside. John raised the disruptor, his heart pounding. First fight. The door splintered as the first hunter stepped through, its glowing eyes locking onto John instantly. It moved with a mechanical precision, scanning the room as if calculating every possible move he could make. Behind it, the other two hunters entered, their towering forms filling the small farmhouse. John tightened his grip on the disruptor, sweat dripping down his forehead despite the chill of the storm. He had one shot at this, one chance to level the playing field, even if only for a moment. The lead hunter raised its weapon, the glowing tip charging with energy. John's heart raced as he pointed the disruptor at it and pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened, and panic surged through him. Then, with a loud whirring crack, a wave of blue light burst from the device, washing over the hunters like a ripple in the air. The effect was immediate. The lead hunter's weapon fizzled and sparked, the glow fading as the energy died. The other two hunters staggered, their movements slowing as their systems tried to adapt to the disruption. "Okay, that worked," John muttered, his voice shaky. He didn't waste any time. Grabbing the heavy wrench he'd stuffed in his pocket earlier, he lunged at the lead hunter, swinging with all his strength. The wrench connected with its head, and the force sent the hunter stumbling backward into the others. "Not so tough now, are you?" John said, adrenaline surging through him. But his small victory was short-lived. The disruptor's effect was already wearing off. The hunter's movements became sharper, faster, as their systems rebooted. The second hunter lunged forward, its clawed hand swiping at John. He barely dodged, the claws slicing through the air inches from his face. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over the broken coffee table, and raised the shotgun. Firing point-blank, He aimed for the second hunter's head. The blast sent the hunter reeling, its faceplate cracked and sparking, but it didn't go down. Instead, it turned back to him, its glowing eyes burning brighter with anger. "Oh, come on," John shouted, frustration mixing with fear. He backed toward the cellar door, his mind racing. He couldn't keep this up. The hunters were too strong, too relentless. If they reached the cellar, Elara was as good as dead. And so was he. As the hunters closed in, something unexpected happened. A loud, high-pitched hum filled the room, followed by a pulse of light from the floor. The hunters froze, their heads snapping toward the source. John turned, confused, and realized the noise was coming from the trapdoor to the cellar. "What the hell is she doing?" he muttered. The answer came quickly. The trapdoor burst open, and Elara stepped out, holding a strange, glowing device in her hands. Her silver skin shimmered brighter than before, and her blue eyes blazed with determination. "Elara, no," John shouted. "Get back down there." But she ignored him. Raising the device, she pointed it at the hunters and pressed a button. A wave of shimmering energy shot out, slamming into the 3 hunters and sending them crashing into the walls. The energy didn't just disrupt their systems, it overloaded them. Sparks flew from their armor, and the lights in their eyes flickered before going dark. For a moment, everything was silent except for the rain pounding against the roof. John stared at Elara, his jaw slack. What the hell was that?" "An EMP generator," Elara said, her voice calm but firm. "I built it from the components of my ship. It's not permanent. They'll reboot soon, but it will buy us time." "Time for what?" John asked, still trying to catch his breath. "To leave," she said. "We can't stay here. They've already sent a signal to their reinforcements. More will come." John looked at the hunters, their massive forms slumped against the walls, and then back at Elara. "And where exactly are we supposed to go?" "I don't know about you, but I don't have a spaceship parked out back." Elara's expression softened. "I can fix my beacon," she said. "If I activate it, my people will come for me. But I need time, and I need help." John ran a hand through his wet hair, shaking his head. "You're asking me to fight more of these things. I'm just a farmer, Elara. I'm not cut out for this." She stepped closer, her glowing eyes meeting his. "You're more than that, John. You've already proven it. You stood up to them when you didn't have to. You risked your life for someone you didn't even know." John looked away, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. He could have walked away, could have left her to fend for herself. But he didn't. And now, there was no turning back. "Fine," he said, his voice steady. "But if we're doing this, we're doing it my way. We can't just wait for them to come back. We need to hit them before they hit us." Elara nodded, her determination matching his. "Then we'll fight together." John glanced at the hunters, still motionless but already starting to twitch. "We'd better get moving then," he said, "because they're not going to stay down for long." Revealing the truth. The truck rumbled down the dirt road, its old engine groaning as John gripped the wheel tightly. The storm was finally dying down, but the night was still dark and heavy. Elara sat in the passenger seat, her silvery skin faintly glowing in the dim light. She clutched the EMP device close to her chest, her blue eyes staring out the window as if expecting the hunters to reappear at any moment. "We can't keep running forever," John said, breaking the tense silence. "You said they'll send reinforcements. How many are we talking about here?" "Enough to leave nothing standing," Elara replied quietly. "They'll bring weapons, drones, ships. They'll level this area if it means capturing me." John tightened his grip on the wheel. "Great. So not only am I hiding an alien fugitive, but now I've got an intergalactic death squad coming to wreck my farm." Elara turned to him, her expression softening. "I never wanted to involve you, John. I thought I could escape on my own. But after the crash," she hesitated, then added, "you saved my life. I owe you the truth. John glanced at her, his brow furrowing. The truth? About what? She looked down at the EMP device in her lap, as if gathering her thoughts. Do you know what it's like to watch your world die? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. To see everything you've ever known, your home, your people, turn to ash because of greed and power. John didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the road, but her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He'd lived his whole life in one place, surrounded by fields and quiet skies. He couldn't imagine losing it all. My people, the Syrian, once had a thriving world, Alara continued. Our cities touched the clouds, and our technology could heal wounds, feed the hungry, and create wonders. But we were naive. We trusted the wrong allies, an alien faction known as the Clivar Syndicate. They came to us offering trade, knowledge, and friendship. In reality, they only wanted to exploit us. She paused, her hands tightening around the device. When we realized their plans, it was too late. The Syndicate poisoned our world, stripping it of resources and turning it into a barren wasteland. My people were scattered across the stars, refugees with no home. But I found something. What did you find? John asked, his voice quiet but firm. A way to fight back, Alara said, her glowing eyes meeting his. There's a device, a key, that can restore my world. It's hidden on one of the Syndicate's planets, buried beneath layers of security. I found the coordinates. I stole the data. That's why they're after me. John's jaw tightened. So let me get this straight. You've got the key to saving your people, and they're trying to kill you before you can use it. Alara nodded. Exactly. If they capture me, they'll destroy the data and ensure the Syndicate's power remains unchallenged. John let out a low whistle. That's a lot to take in. You're telling me you're not just running for your life. You're carrying the hope of an entire planet. Yes, she said simply. And now, I've put you in danger because of it. I'm sorry, John. John shook his head, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Don't apologize. You didn't crash your ship on purpose. And besides, I'm already neck-deep in this mess. Might as well see it through. They drove in silence for a moment, the weight of Alara's story settling over them like a heavy blanket. Finally, John spoke again. So what's the plan? You said you can call for help. I can, Alara said, her tone growing more hopeful. If we can find a safe place, I can repair my distress beacon. My people have scouts scattered across the galaxy. If they pick up my signal, they'll come. Safe place, huh? John muttered, glancing at the rearview mirror. Not sure how safe we can be with those hunters breathing down our necks. Alara tilted her head, considering his words. There is one option. If we can lure them into a trap, disable them, we'll have enough time to repair the beacon. John frowned. Lure them? Are you kidding me? I barely held them off the first time. And now you want to invite them. I'm not asking you to fight them head-on, Alara said. We can use the terrain to our advantage. Somewhere enclosed, with tight spaces, your world's weapons may not be advanced, but they can still cause damage in the right hands. John thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. There's an abandoned factory about 10 miles from here. Old place, full of junk and narrow hallways. If we're lucky, it's still standing. That could work, Alara said, her voice resolute. If we can funnel them into the building, we can disable them long enough for me to send the signal. John sighed, his shoulders slumping. This is insane, you know that, right? Alara smiled faintly. Insanity is sometimes the only way to survive. John chuckled dryly. Guess we're both crazy, then. As they approached the factory, the truck's headlights illuminated the crumbling structure. It was a massive, skeletal building, its rusted walls looming like the bones of some long-dead beast. John parked the truck and killed the engine, the silence of the night pressing down on them. Are you ready? Alara asked, stepping out of the truck. John grabbed his shotgun and a flashlight, his heart pounding. "No," he admitted, "but let's do it anyway." They entered the factory, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. The plan was simple: set traps, use Alara's tech to disable the hunters, and hold them off long enough to activate the beacon. Simple, but far from easy. As they began preparing, John couldn't shake the feeling that this was the calm before the storm. The hunters would come. They always did. And when they did, he'd be ready. The final stand. The abandoned factory loomed in the darkness, its jagged metal frame creaking under the weight of time and the storm's lingering winds. John and Alara stood in the main hall, surrounded by rusted machinery and piles of debris. The air smelled of oil and decay, but it was their best chance of survival. John knelt next to an old workbench, spreading out the tools and supplies they had brought from the truck. "All right, we've got traps to set, choke points to block, and not a lot of time to do it," he said, glancing at Alara. "How long do you need to fix that beacon?" Alara was crouched nearby, her silver fingers delicately working on the small broken device. She looked up, her glowing blue eyes steady. 15 minutes, maybe 20. But I'll need uninterrupted time to get it working. John nodded grimly. "Then I'll make sure you get it. You stay hidden. Work on that beacon, and I'll keep the hunters busy." "You can't face them alone," Alara said firmly, standing to meet his gaze. "I know you've been brave, but these hunters are relentless. They won't stop until one of us is dead." John smirked, though there was no humor in it. "Well, let's make sure it's them, not us." She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small circular device. "Take this," she said, handing it to him. "It's a proximity mine. Simple to use. Press the button on top to arm it, and it will detonate when anything gets too close." John examined the alien device, its surface smooth and glowing faintly. "Neat. Do you have more of these?" "Only the one," she said apologetically. "My supplies are limited." "Figures," John muttered, tucking it into his pocket. "All right, let's get to work." Setting the trap, John and Alara moved through the factory, carefully setting up their defenses. John used old chains, barrels, and scrap metal to block off certain entrances, forcing the hunters to take a specific path through the building. He also rigged a few makeshift tripwires using rope and tools he had found lying around. Alara, meanwhile, hid herself in a small room on the upper floor. She placed the beacon on an old metal table, her fingers working quickly to reconnect the wires and repair the broken components. She glanced out the shattered window, her eyes scanning the dark horizon for any sign of movement. "John," her voice came through the small communicator she had given him. "The hunters will track my energy signature. Once I activate the beacon, they'll know exactly where I am." "Good," John replied, his voice crackling over the line. "That's the plan. They'll come charging in, and I'll make sure they regret it." "Be careful," Alara said softly. "If they overwhelm you, Don't worry about me," John interrupted. "Just get that signal out. That's all that matters." Alara hesitated, then nodded to herself. "Understood." The hunters arrived. The first sign of the hunters came as a faint hum in the air. John stood in the shadows of the factory's main hall, shotgun in hand, listening intently. The sound grew louder, accompanied by the crunch of footsteps on gravel outside. "They're here." Alara's voice came through the communicator, her tone tight with fear. John took a deep breath, his hand steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Stay quiet. Let me handle this." The hunters entered the factory like shadows, their towering forms illuminated by the faint glow of their armor. They moved with precision, their scanning devices sweeping the area. The lead hunter raised its weapon, the barrel glowing faintly as it searched for a target. John waited, hidden behind a stack of rusted crates. When the first hunter stepped close enough, he triggered the proximity mine. The explosion was deafening, a burst of blue light that sent the hunter flying backward. Its armor sparked and smoked, but it wasn't down yet. "Come on," John shouted, stepping out of cover and firing his shotgun. The blast hit the wounded hunter square in the chest, sending it crashing into a pile of debris. The other two hunters turned toward him immediately, their glowing eyes locking onto his position. "All right, big guys," John muttered, backing away. "Let's dance." The second hunter charged at him, its claws extended. John ducked behind a support beam, the creature's claws scraping against the metal with a horrible screech. He fired another shot, hitting its shoulder, but it barely slowed down. As the third hunter advanced, John triggered one of his makeshift tripwires. A barrel filled with debris fell from above, striking the hunter and knocking it to the ground. "Not bad for farm equipment," John muttered, running deeper into the factory. Alara's desperate race. Upstairs, Alara worked furiously on the beacon. Sparks flew as she connected the final wires, her hands trembling with urgency. She could hear the sounds of the fight below. Explosions, gunfire, and the inhuman growls of the hunters. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to focus. Come on," she whispered, her fingers dancing over the device. Finally, the beacon lit up, a bright blue glow filling the room. Alara let out a breath of relief and activated the signal. A low hum filled the air as the beacon began transmitting. "John," she said into the communicator, "the signal is active. My people will hear it." "That's great," John replied, his voice strained, "because I'm running out of tricks down here." The final confrontation. John's traps had bought him time, but the hunters were adapting. The first one he'd hit with the mine was back on its feet, its armor cracked but functional. The second and third hunters were flanking him, forcing him into the center of the main hall. "You don't give up, do you?" John said, breathing heavily. He glanced around, looking for anything he could use. His shotgun was almost out of shells, and the hunters were closing in. Just as one of the hunters raised its weapon to fire, a deafening roar shook the factory. A bright light filled the room, and John shielded his eyes as a ship descended through the factory's broken roof. It was sleek and silver, with glowing blue thrusters. The hunters turned toward the ship, their focus shifting. Alara appeared at the railing above, her voice commanding. "Leave him alone." The ship's weapons fired, blue energy beams cutting through the hunters with deadly precision. In seconds, the fight was over. The hunters lay motionless, their armor smoking. John collapsed against a wall, exhausted but alive. He looked up at Alara, who was descending the stairs with a small, relieved smile. "Nice timing," he said, his voice hoarse. She extended a hand to him, her eyes soft. "I told you we'd fight together. Escape and goodbye." The aftermath of the battle was eerily quiet. The once menacing hunters now lay in smoldering heaps, their glowing eyes extinguished. The alien ship hovered above the ruined factory, its bright blue lights casting long shadows across the broken walls. John leaned against a rusted pillar, his shotgun hanging limply at his side. His body ached, his clothes were torn, and his face was streaked with dirt and sweat. But he was alive. Alara approached him, her silver skin shimmering faintly under the ship's light. Her expression was a mixture of relief and sadness. "It's over," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the hovering ship. "For now." John looked at her, his breath still heavy from the fight. "I don't know if you noticed, but I'm not exactly built for intergalactic combat," he said with a weak chuckle. "I'm glad your ride showed up when it did." Alara gave him a faint smile but didn't respond. Instead, she glanced at the beacon still clutched in her hands. "The signal worked. My people received it. They'll take me to safety and to finish where I started." John nodded, his face serious now. "So that's it, huh? You go back to your people, save your world, and I go back to being a farmer." She hesitated, her glowing blue eyes locking onto his. "It doesn't have to be the end," she said. "You could come with me." The words hung in the air like a challenge. John stared at her, caught off guard. "Come with you," he repeated. "You mean, leave Earth? Leave everything I know?" "Yes," Elura said, stepping closer. "You've already proven you're capable of more than just surviving. You have courage, resourcefulness, and a sense of justice. My people could use someone like you." John's gaze dropped to the floor as he considered her words. The idea was tempting, leaving behind the monotony of his quiet life, exploring the stars, fighting for something bigger than himself. But it also terrified him. Earth was all he had ever known. Could he really give it up? "What would I even do out there?" he asked finally. "I'm just a farmer. I don't know anything about your world or your war." "You'd learn," Elura said gently. "And you wouldn't be alone. I'd be there to guide you." John looked up at her, searching her face for something, reassurance, maybe, or a reason to say yes. But before he could answer, a deep, commanding voice interrupted them. "Elura." They both turned to see a figure descending from the ship. It was tall and humanoid, with sleek, silver armor and glowing markings similar to Elura's. The alien carried itself with an air of authority, its movements smooth and deliberate. "Commander Lyris," Elura said, inclining her head. "Thank you for responding to my signal." Lyris nodded, their glowing eyes briefly scanning John. "You've done well, Elura. Your actions have brought us one step closer to restoring our world." John felt a pang of discomfort under the alien's gaze. He straightened up, his exhaustion forgotten. "She didn't do it alone," he said, his voice firm. "I helped her." Lyris turned to him, their expression unreadable. "Indeed. And for that, we owe you a debt, human. Few would have done what you did." John shrugged, trying to play off the compliment. "Just doing what felt right." Lyris looked back at Elura. "We must leave immediately. The Syndicate will not take this defeat lightly, and reinforcements will likely follow." Elura nodded, but her eyes lingered on John. "I need a moment," she said. Lyris hesitated, then inclined their head and returned to the ship. As the hum of the ship's engines filled the air, Elura turned back to John. "You saved me when you didn't have to," she said. "And you fought for me when the odds were impossible. I'll never forget that." John managed a small smile. "Guess I'm not as selfish as I thought." She stepped closer, reaching out to touch his arm. Her hand was warm despite its metallic sheen. "If you ever change your mind," she said, "if you ever decide you want more than this life, I'll come for you. I promise." John swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over him. He wanted to say something, to tell her he might take her up on that offer, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he nodded, his voice thick. "Take care of yourself out there, Elura." Elura smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her face. "You too, John. And thank you for everything." With that, she turned and walked toward the ship. John watched as she climbed the ramp, her silver form disappearing into the vessel. The ship's lights brightened, and a low hum filled the air as it began to rise. John stepped out of the factory, standing in the open field as the ship ascended into the sky. The storm had cleared, and the stars were visible now, scattered across the vast expanse of space. He watched until the ship was nothing more than a faint speck of light, then finally disappeared. The quiet returned, but it felt different now. For the first time in years, John didn't feel alone. He looked up at the stars, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe someday," he murmured.